Welcome back here with Goldberg. Today we'll be talking about living in a van or vehicle, rent selling, and owning your own house. I've probably done this before, but I have some more insight because I've been in the house for a few years and we've also gotten the experience of the pandemic, so can nudge us along in a healthy direction. Van life has been criticized, probably rightfully so, for in some way encouraging people to be used to having less, not necessarily being a minimalist, but rather, oh, you can't afford to own anything, so you might as well just be in a vehicle. Now, strangely enough, there are people, like one of the most popular guys on TikTok and YouTube, he actually bought a brand new van, 30 grand and like 5 grand for modifications. So that's not the biggest expense, but unless you're committing to it for a long time, it's a pretty penny for just something you're going to be on the road with. Depending, of course, how much money you make and where you are, what's the cost of rent or a mortgage. I know those are very high right now, so I understand the appeal. When I did it, I bought a car off of Craigslist, used, wasn't perfect, but it fit my needs. And then I got a reinforced sleeping bag, not the stuff that you find at Walmart, but rather I had to go online to find one that was sub 40 degrees in order to make sure that you can be comfortable depending on what the elements are that you're facing. Okay, so the benefits of van life, obviously less overhead, ho ho ho. You can save a great deal of money. You also have more mobility if you want to travel the country, but that assumes you're not having a regular job, you're doing gig economy or digital nomad, or maybe in fact you can work remotely. So those are all some advantages. Now I should point out, and this is not discussed enough, minimalism to a degree, but it can also have disadvantages. So for one, refrigeration. I could never get that down. Some people have solar fridges. I think those are coming out, so you might be okay, but the likelihood is you're going to have to rely mostly on dry goods, stuff that is not going to be perishable. And that's not the end of the day, but you probably won't eat as nutritiously. Now, some people, they have their grill, the propane, and they cook stuff. So that's fine, but unless you're very efficient with that and you have the solar fridge set up, you're going to be going out to eat a lot if you want other food, which might not be that healthy. So it's a trade-off. If you want to be eating a lot of granola bars and frickin', again, goods that are not going to be wilting under the lights, much like your endowment, you need to definitely invest in something else. So I found that because since owning a house, being able to have a refrigerator, maybe what I should do is launch a business like you can rent a fridge if you're a van lifer. I'd probably make a lot of money. That's a good idea. But having a fridge, being able to store like dry goods, I can make bread, I can make, cook meat and refrigerate it. Those things are hugely advantageous, and no one really talks about them in these van life communities seriously enough because they just get lost in the romance. Another dynamic is going to be stuff like keeping clean. You saw with the pandemic, they shut down the gyms. Where are you going to get a shower from? Well, get the wet wipes. That's fine. Or you can get a solar shower. That's providing that a Karen doesn't report you for indecent behavior. So that's definitely a tricky dynamic. More importantly, you get sick. Unless you check yourself into a hotel for 5 days to recover, you got the head cold or the flu. Being in a vehicle and being ill is very unpleasant. I've done it. You want to be in a climate controlled environment where you can have, like if I'm sick at my house, I've got the electric kettle on repeat, hot tea, I can make stuff, I can store extra stuff that I don't have space for in the car. So that's a consideration. Also, if you're reliant on that to live in and then you have a problem like around the holidays, it has to be solved with the car, it's not drivable, where are you going to sleep? You're going to have to get a hotel anyway. So that's one of the downsides, the lack of consistency, because you never know if your vehicle does break down, especially if it's used. And now you're dealing with a problem of trying to find a place to stay in the elements, unless you want to just sleep on the park bench. So those are the trade-offs. People will point to other benefits potentially. Maybe you have less, you're not tied to a contract or mortgage, so I get that. But van life, I don't think is realistic for most people beyond a short period of time because inevitably you're going to have to come down to earth and realize, shoot, I kind of need a permanent location unless I'm happy just always traveling. And there's some things that I just mentioned that it's nice to have a place you can store them beyond just what you need day to day, but what you might need in a specific circumstance. Next on the list, we have being a rent sell. This would be primarily renting an apartment, maybe a basement, a room, whatnot. I think renting a room, if it's for a decent rate and gives you access to a common area, washer and dryer, your refrigerator, kitchen, that's probably the best option, most cost efficient, unless you can just live with your parents. But my experience with renting, I mean, I've done the renting like in a house with other people. I did not enjoy that. I'll get to it in just a bit. I also rented in apartments. So you will deal with the neighbors. Most of them we were cool. I think it was like a 85% or at least 75% black neighborhood. I think all my neighbors were black. I had one old crotchety lady who I say she's black, but she had paler skin than I do, and she was always raising hell about me just walking around because I was above her in the apartment. She was trying to get me evicted for stupid reasons. And in the end, it was just one of those old people that wanted someone to talk to them, so that's why she harassed me. But I don't miss that by any stretch. In fact, apparently she had run out the prior tenant. Some lady was telling me. But yeah, it's nice. You got a decent sized space. I didn't even use all the space in my apartment because I didn't have enough stuff. And I only wanted a one bedroom, but they didn't have them available, so I went for a two bedroom, paid a little bit more. The nice thing about renting an apartment, well, most things are not your responsibility beyond utilities and your rent. So if a light goes out or something has to be fixed, they will have to do it. If you've got a good property management company, it's not an issue. If you've got a lazy Care Bear landlord, it could be different. So that's something to consider. The problem, they can always raise the rent. That money isn't really going into anything per se. So you have to be certainly cautious with how long you want to do that. But again, if you are renting similar to van life, you have a contract, but as long as you can pay it out or they can just take the deposit, you are not locked to a bank in perpetuity. All right, and I have to discuss that specifically when it comes to housing. One thing to note though, if you do get an apartment, make sure it has a washer and dryer in your unit. None of this shared stuff because I had it downstairs. It was one washer and two dryers, or two washers, one dryer, and you had to share it with six different units, which was a nightmare. Do not recommend that in any shape whatsoever. And then the laundromats suck because you have to sit there letting it go. That's another thing I should have mentioned with van life. How do you do laundry effectively? So these are considerations to where, especially the area you're in, it's going to heavily affect what the quality is, how fast it has to be, and whether you can orient your life around it or it becomes annoying. Because like with the apartment, people would always do their laundry on a certain day, got pissed off, so I chose a different day, and then people start following me and doing the same thing. This really grinds my gears, I have to be honest. And so, but overall, like I said, advantages of renting, you're less likely to be tied down, for the long run as far as the bank is concerned. So when we come to the question of owning a house, there's definitely trade-offs. In my case, it took me about 6 months to find one. There were some misfires, like you put a offer and then you get the inspection results. You say, well, shoot, I have to put all this extra money in. Make sure you get an inspector and a good one because otherwise you can be screwed. My mortgage is not bad. I could make 40 grand a year and be able to pay it, although I make obviously a lot more than that. I also have an interest rate which is fixed and pretty low. It's not like the stuff I've been hearing people almost 7% now, and the prices are still high. So I would steer clear unless you're just trying to flip a house or you're in a part of the country where they're still miraculously cheap. I would avoid locking yourself down with those rates. But so I get into the house. What do I like? Okay, so you got a lot of space. So people talk all this nonsense about minimalism, and there's truth to it. I would say I'm generally a minimalist. Nevertheless, there are some niceties you can have. So, for example, a lot where I can plant stuff. Now you have to cut the grass. That sucks. I haven't yet tested whether you can just let the grass grow, but I'm sure the municipality would fine me. That's how they tend to be. Oh, you gotta have curb appeal. But I don't have an HOA. That is good. I just have a pesky local government. Now, other stuff like having a refrigerator, we talked about that before, having a bread machine, blenders, electric kettle, all those things, having more storage space, especially for food, is well worth, I think. You can do that in an apartment, obviously, but I like having the ability to make food, not be reliant always on something that's quick and easy, or a granola bar, or let's just get some hot water and dump it in here. So generally speaking, I think that's a huge benefit. Some of you guys might remember me saying if you're going to buy a house, ideally get tenants to cover the mortgage. Now, initially I did have someone renting a room, but once they left, I got kind of used to the inner sanctum feel, not having to trip over others when I come home, not sharing a sink where they leave their encrusted dishes and pizza boxes to rot for the mice, uh, not sharing a refrigerator or indeed a bathroom. And people just have a tendency of disrespecting stuff they don't own, or indeed at times, even if they own it, they disrespect it. Like you guys as girlfriends, what do? They plop down and say, "Feed me DoorDash." Just saying. But I made the calculation, my mortgage is not too bad. All in sum, even with utilities, I might hit 1,100 a month, and that's usually only if I'm using a lot. It gets a little bit worse if it cools down, but otherwise, I'm in pretty good shape. I'm actually making extra payments on the principal. But this does bring me to an important point that no one really tells you about owning a house. It's incredibly important. A lot of you guys follow libertarians. You may not even fully grasp this, but this is the scam of home ownership, okay? So obviously you go in, you got your real estate fees, you got your cover charges, your down payments, and then you're going to have your property insurance and all that, property taxes. So the government is always a partner. It doesn't matter when you keel over. But that's not the most sinister aspect, because property taxes, at least where I'm at, and given my house, the age, they're not going to be too substantial. This is the really messed up part. So obviously you get the loan, so you have to pay back the principal and the interest. The interest can sometimes exceed the principal. And if you actually pay it off for that 30-year period, you can end up paying almost as much in interest as you do principal, or very close to it. So you have to make those extra payments Dave Ramsey style. But how they really get you, so who's the majority partner? It's the bank. They have the loan, they own the property. Until you pay it off, the bank is still in the picture. But while that's happening, you as the so-called homeowner have to eat the cost of major repairs. So I had to do a water heater, which wasn't too bad, but then there was other stuff like I had my heating system went out. It was like 2 different tranches. Granted, I should have used a different company because this one was not the most expensive, but they were those types that, oh, there's always something wrong they can charge you for. So that was like 10 grand total. It should have been less, probably by 3 or 4, but lessons learned. At any rate, you don't get to say at the end of the year, oh yeah, that's deductible. No, unless it's a business expense, but you have to have it as a whole rental property. You can't say like, oh, well, I fixed the heating and that applies to one room. No, it applies to the whole house, which if you're living in, it's not entirely a business. So that's a very tricky dynamic that they use. Of course, you can, at the end, when you sell it, you can tally up those expenses and supposedly deduct, but it's not a very effective system. If this country really wanted to help out the working and middle class, they would let you deduct like 5 grand a year in home repairs or something more, because that would incentivize people, regular middle class people, to do stuff, to make improvements. There are houses that sit there, like where I live, there's some of these houses you can tell nothing's been done to them. I can afford to do some fixes here and there, but even that, I was having someone look at it to replace the front door for something that's a little bit more energy efficient, replace siding. They wanted like over $30,000. It just becomes ridiculous, and you can't deduct it. You can, you get a little tax credit, but it's nothing substantial. So that's the big scam. You're paying back the loan, you're paying for the privilege of living in the house, a form of rent, the interest, and you're also improving their property. So if you happen to foreclose, they're not going to refund you the repairs. They're just going to have that enhanced property that they can sell. So that's just the little dynamic to be careful of. Other stuff I do, well, I have like a little home office. I get that deduction, which is not all that much. You can do that in an apartment though. So all you have to do is have a legitimate business LLC. You can have that that deduction. Do I use it all around? I mean, to a degree. Like I said, some of this stuff you'll find items to fill it, although I still have 2 bedrooms that are pretty much, bare. They have the beds, but nothing else. So, oh, you should bring in some of those hotties from Colombia. Yeah, maybe. But maybe I could Airbnb it. I don't know how popular it would be in this area specifically because it's not right next to a bunch of tourist attractions, but we can investigate that perhaps. At any rate, what's my takeaway? If you can get a house reasonably, and if you're down with the tenants or it's just not that bad to pay for, it is good to the extent that yes, your money goes into a loan. So if you pay it off, you have something. You can also, in my case, if I were to lose my job, I could get tenants, so I could still be okay. If you're in an apartment, you lose your job, you don't get something comparable, you're going to probably have to leave. So that's something of the benefit of having a house. At the same time, there are a lot of expenses, and you don't necessarily know those expenses once you just buy it. Those expenses will crop up along the way. Ideally, especially in this economy, if you can live with your parents, that's probably the best option because you'll save a great deal. Otherwise, renting a room, renting a basement is probably the next best option. Stay away from apartments because they're going to cost a great deal unless you're in some dirt poor part of the nation. And no matter what decision you make, do not romanticize it. Look at the cold hard facts, how much money it's going to cost, what your interest rate's going to be, what the freaking deposit is, what the utilities cost. Have all that up front and make a decision rationally based upon your income. Don't do it all, oh, it'd be so nice, it'd be so romantic to be in a vehicle, it'd be so romantic to be in a house, it'd be so romantic to be a rent sell. Make sure it's rational and not just based upon emotions because too many people make that choice and it comes back to bite them.